The morning America ran out of fuel didn't begin with missiles, cyber warfare headlines, or a foreign government threat. It began quietly, inside a corporate network, with a single leaked password. Within hours, gas stations across the East Coast started running dry. Long lines formed overnight. Panic buying spread faster than facts. Governors declared states of emergency. And millions of people realized something terrifying. The most powerful economy on Earth could be frozen by one invisible mistake. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't a drill. This was the Colonial Pipeline attack, and it exposed a truth most people still don't want to face. The systems that run modern life are far more fragile than we've been led to believe. But here's the part almost no one tells you. This wasn't a sophisticated cyberweapon. It wasn't an elite nation-state operation. And it wasn't some genius hacker breaking through firewalls. It was something much simpler, much more dangerous, and much more common. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this wasn't an anomaly, but a preview of what is coming next. Colonial Pipeline wasn't just another company. It controlled nearly half of the fuel supply for the entire east coast of the United States. Jet fuel for major airports, gasoline for cities, diesel for transportation. One company quietly powering daily life for tens of millions of people. Most Americans had never heard its name before the attack, and that anonymity was part of the problem. Because when something is invisible, it's easy to assume it's secure. On May 7, 2021, Colonial Pipeline shut down operations entirely. Not because their pipes were physically damaged, not because fuel stopped flowing underground, but because their digital systems were compromised. And the company made a decision that would ripple across the entire nation. They pulled the plug themselves. Gas stations didn't run out because hackers stole fuel. They ran out because trust collapsed. Fear spread, and human behavior did the rest. But let's rewind, because the real story doesn't start with empty pumps. It starts on the dark web, months or even years earlier, when employee credentials were quietly leaked, sold, and resold like loose change. At some point, one of those passwords still worked. No zero-day exploit. No Hollywood hacking montage. Just a reused password and the absence of multi-factor authentication. That single login opened the door. What walked through it was not a lone criminal, but a business. The group responsible called itself DarkSide, and this is where the story stops being about hacking and starts being about economics. DarkSide didn't operate like a gang, they operated like a startup. They had branding, they had customer support, they had rules of engagement, they even had a public relations strategy. DarkSide ran a ransomware as a service model, meaning affiliates could use their software, launch attacks, and split the profits. It was scalable, efficient, and brutally effective. When DarkSide breached Colonial Pipeline's network, they didn't immediately destroy systems. They encrypted data. They left a message, a negotiation. This was not chaos. This was leverage. Colonial Pipeline now faced an impossible choice: restore operations slowly and risk prolonged disruption, or pay the ransom and hope the attackers kept their word. The company chose to pay nearly $5 million in cryptocurrency. And here's where the illusion of control collapses. Paying didn't instantly fix the problem. The decryption tools were slow. Operations remained offline. Panic had already spread. The damage was already done. The ransom was just the opening cost. But the real price was something far more dangerous: confidence. Trust in infrastructure. Trust in corporations. Trust that the system could protect itself. Now here's the question most coverage never really answers. How did it get this bad? The answer isn't hacking skill. It's incentives. Colonial Pipeline, like many infrastructure companies, optimized for efficiency, not resilience. Cybersecurity is expensive. It slows things down. It doesn't generate revenue. And as long as nothing goes wrong, it's easy to treat security as a future problem, until the future arrives all at once. DarkSide understood this perfectly. They didn't need to attack the strongest defenses. They targeted the weakest link, because modern systems are only as strong as their most ignored detail. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable, because DarkSide didn't see themselves as villains. In fact, after the backlash, they issued statements claiming they were apolitical, that they didn't intend to cause societal harm, that they were just running a business. That framing wasn't accidental. It was strategic. It made the attack feel like an unfortunate transaction, not a criminal assault. And that mindset is exactly why this keeps happening. By now, you might be wondering why the US government didn't stop this sooner, or why such critical infrastructure was allowed to be so vulnerable. That answer lives in a gray zone where regulation lags technology and responsibility is spread so thin that no one fully owns the risk. Colonial Pipeline was private. The damage was public. The response was reactive, and the lesson was quickly buried under news cycles. The FBI later recovered part of the ransom. Headlines celebrated the win. But focusing on the recovery misses the point. The real success wasn't stealing money. It was proving that disruption itself is profitable, that fear can move markets faster than malware, that modern economies are built on assumptions that can be shattered by a single credential. DarkSide eventually disappeared, at least by name, but the model didn't die. It multiplied, because ransomware isn't about code. It's about leverage. And leverage exists everywhere. Systems are complex, interconnected, and quietly neglected. Hospitals, airports, power grids, water supplies, anywhere, downtime costs more than ransom. And here's the promise I made earlier. Why this wasn't an anomaly. The Colonial Pipeline attack worked because the system allowed it to work. Because efficiency was rewarded over redundancy. Because silence was cheaper than transparency. Because companies learned they could pay quietly and move on. And because attackers learned that disruption scales better than theft. This wasn't the day hackers stopped America. It was the day America realized how easily it could be stopped. And that realization is the most valuable outcome of all. If you think this story ends with Colonial Pipeline, you're missing the pattern. This wasn't the last warning. It was the loudest one so far. The pipes didn't fail. The software didn't revolt. The system behaved exactly as designed. And unless those incentives change, the next shutdown won't be surprising. It will be inevitable. If you want to understand how modern scams, frauds, and system-level failures actually work, not just who gets blamed when they collapse, subscribe to the channel, because the next crisis won't announce itself. It will start quietly, with another password that still works.